Welcome to The Antidote. This is Greg McCarran.
And this is Jeremy Rothschild.
Right now, as we record right now, it's about 7:25 a.m. Central Time, and we are headed back from Des Moines, Iowa, back to Kansas City, Missouri, and Lawrence, Kansas, respectively, after going up and taking a 2-day trip for the Iowa Caucus. And right now, after some late breaking news that has come out this morning, we're still trying to, I guess we're still in some ways still trying to process the significance of this news that is broken this morning via, I believe, Lee Fang, and is reported by, we'll give credit where credit's due, Max Blumenthal in the Gray Zone Project, regarding the nature of this chaotic Iowa caucus process where we've done
Allegedly
chaotic. I mean, the way the media is portraying it, though, the chaotic Iowa caucus scenario where no votes are coming out, no votes are being revealed yet, and there's all this talk about we'll start getting results sometime today, and just very interesting scenario. But I guess what we should do, since we've teased it, is we should try to walk through this late breaking news that's come out regarding the company that is behind this. The process that's taking place to tally things in Iowa and the consequences of this.
Yes, and so the Iowa caucus is a very specific process. It's very open, and it's very grassroots democratic, and it's very heartland in many ways too. And what's interesting is we only did a few interviews yesterday. During the caucuses, we were in downtown Des Moines between two different caucuses in the downtown area. One which was very close to the media center, which was the and it's basically two big Polk County locations, I think.
Yes, Polk County, Iowa precincts, the biggest precinct in the state for the caucus process.
And so, what's interesting is talk to two people on the ground, one a caucus goer, and then one a caucus precinct captain or chair or something like that.
Yes.
About what they think about the process, and both of them supported the process, and then later on actually had a very brief conversation with Jake Tapper, who was covering one of the caucuses, and the other question that I was posing to them. Beyond what they thought about the caucus process was about this question of this counting app that had an apparently anonymous, or it was not being released by the Democratic Party in Iowa, who had apparently contracted for some unnamed company, software contractor, to build a counting app or a communications application to report on the caucus counts. Because what happens is each caucus is separated. They take place in all kinds of different spaces, from where we were, which is almost like one of them was actually a mall kind of space, and the other was sort of like a side of a concert venue, multi-level place with like where maybe a restaurant takes place, an entry to one of the big theaters in Des Moines where a lot of bands have played.
Yes.
And then other places around Iowa, they took place in school gymnasiums, which actually became a trope.
Oh, yeah.
I would say a dog whistle trope for some on CNN that were trying to disparage and undermine the caucus process as the results were not coming out. And so then what they do is they go through this self-sorting process to come to some kind of agreement about how the breakdown of what they call viable candidates. So first they try to separate a viable candidate from a non-viable candidate, and then they try to convince each other about who to create alliances with in terms of their caucus. And then all of those individual processes are then supposed to be reported on up through to the central party tabulators maybe. And in the past, this is what I briefly brought up in our live stream from Bernie Sanders quote-unquote watch, or quote-unquote Bernie Sanders Super Bowl watch party, was that this was what had been there were questions about in terms of, for example, Christopher Bolin's reporting on Voxio, of how it was being communicated, the totals, and then in 2016, Microsoft was the application developer for both the Republican and the Democratic Party caucuses in Iowa, and we tracked down the time scheme of this, and this was in the wake. 2015, Microsoft acquires Adalome as basically to insert into its cloud application cybersecurity section an Adalom coming directly out of Israeli military intelligence, the Talpiot program. All three co-founders are Talpiot graduates, and then obviously Israeli military intelligence more generally. And this time it was an anonymous. They were unwilling to state who the developer was, and so I asked all three people who I interviewed yesterday. First a caucus goer, then a caucus captain, and then Jake Tapper about the questions about the application. And there were no answers. And the first caucus goer hadn't even heard that there was an issue of it. And Greg, did you say that he was actually potentially a Pete Buttigieg supporter?
I can't say for sure, but I believe I saw this first person that we talked to, that you got a chance to interview. I think I saw him with the Buttigieg caucusers. I think I did. I believe that's what I saw.
That's
I'm
interesting.
Not positive, but I think I saw him with the Pete Buttigieg people.
And then the caucus captain, he said, "Sure, we've heard little things, but no one's. I'm just going to do my job here." And then and he also emphasized that they have paper backups, I believe, and I believe that he emphasized that. And so it was sort of like he was going to do his job. And then Tapper sort of seemed to dismiss it. He's like, oh, yeah, maybe, I don't know. No one's really thinking about it. And then hours later, after talking to Jake Tapper, and by the way, I went through very quickly as I could, because they went right back to the caucus reporting, and Jake Tapper had to go away. But I went through this whole thing with Microsoft and Israeli intelligence and Adalom, and at the very end, and I said... and Jeffrey Epstein was Israeli military intelligence as he walked away, as the caucus was starting up again. So, but it's very interesting then that hours later we're watching on television that there's abnormalities, and there's weird things going on. They're holding the results, right?
And it's interesting before, and I know we already teased getting into the big late-breaking story that's just come out within the past several hours. But before that, I just want to mention, we did bring up the way the media, CNN, we were watching CNN in the hotel room, just the way CNN was spinning this is just this crazy process, and it doesn't serve our political system well to have. Basically, just trying to portray this as just a chaotic process. People don't know what's going on and all this and that. And I got to say, from what we saw, we were inside this particular precinct where Jake Tapper and Dana Bash from CNN were stationed. And from what I saw in this particular precinct, and I would imagine this is one of the bigger precincts in Iowa. I'd imagine it's probably par for the course for most of the smaller precincts as well. That this was not at all what you would consider what could be described, I don't think, certainly as a chaotic process or even a really disorganized process. It seemed very, very organized. I mean, the people you counted who was caucusing for which candidate, and ultimately you broke down between viable and unviable, and then with the candidates that had the lesser supporters, they got to choose their choice of which candidate they wanted to throw their support behind. And this is how the delegation process is done for, I believe, at first the county conventions, then which will lead to the state conventions, and then ultimately to the national convention. So I was really in front of this media narrative, and I imagine if CNN was pushing it, I imagine certainly this is being pushed in other places as well. You said you saw this all over blue checkmark Twitter as well, this narrative of like, oh, these Iowa caucuses are just backwards and they're not doing a service to our great system. And when in reality, I think that it's a great process to see play out. And I just want to get out in front and say that this is not the way that we saw in Des Moines, in the biggest precinct in the entire state. or the biggest caucus area in the entire state. This was not the case. We did not see chaos or disorganization. In fact, it was the exact opposite of that in just about every way possible.
Thank you for pointing that out, Greg, because that's crucial in all of this. Put aside all of the party politics, the candidate politics, but again, I'll emphasize the power of the American experiment is rooted in these kind of direct, local, boots on the democratic ground processes run by we the people, by and for we the people, okay? And then when you see the disjunction, like you're talking about, between blue checkmark Twitter, CNN News, where they're basically, I mean, David Plouffe was on MSNBC.
David Plouffe was at Obama. What was his role with the Obama administration?
He was basically maybe the Brad Parscale of the Obama campaign, and there's not evidence I've seen that the Obama campaign practiced the dark arts that the Trump campaign got in bed with in terms of what Cambridge Analytica is really doing. Of course, the Russian and Israeli aspects of that type of thing. But it looks like, I think Plouffe was really like deeply involved in the usage of digital demographics and data to be able to target messages. So definitely psychographics, he was like a key chief guy in the Obama campaign. But it turns out that he also is involved with maybe an investor company in the actual company that designed the application. But before we get to that, and we'll get to that, and then we'll sort of finish up with Iowa, and then we'll turn back to our experience and our analysis of the Trump rally a few days ago, in terms of some of maybe the group social dynamics and that kind of thing that we discussed a tiny bit on our live stream. But David Plouffe was announcing that this might be the last Iowa caucus ever. The end of American democracy, I would say. And of course, they want to turn it into some kind of slick, highly data-driven, probably a lot of technology in the intermediary mix, mediating a lot via polling and all that. And polling plays a big part in this. And we pointed out before when we talked about Arthur Finkelstein and Finky and the Kids, that a lot of these people are political operatives, but they're pollsters. Whether it's Tony Fabrizio or John McLaughlin or what's his name,
Alex Castellanos,
or even Frank
Luntz.
Luntz.
Frank Luntz, yes, Frank
who
Luntz.
was involved with Wexner. Frank
Yes.
Luntz was running the Wexner propaganda, quote-unquote, polling information about how they were going to sell the Iraq war not as an interest to Israel, but as an interest of the American people. Remember, that's what Frank Luntz was involved in the Wexner-Epstein, i.e., network. Yes. That Jake Tapper has been told on record is Israeli military intelligence, just like Jack Posobiec, I would point out. Right. As has Tom Steyer, too. That was another interview from yesterday.
As Chuck Todd would have been told if he had gotten a chance to chase him down before he got into his Cadillac Escalade to drive away from the MSNBC studio. Set up organized studio at this coffee shop in downtown Des Moines. But
that's true.
Anyway.
Okay, so Plouffe was announcing the end of the Iowa caucus. The Ron Brownstein, who you're telling me was
senior editor for The Atlantic, which is run by former
Israeli prison guard.
Yes, Jeffrey Goldberg.
Like I pointed out, he was once a Israeli prison guard, and now he's an Israeli prison guard for American Minds.
Yes.
And so Ron Brownstein was the representative of this dog whistling talking point against, really against middle America, and there's an aspect of this against a certain class of white middle America, yes. I would say, by the Jewish Zionist owned media here, and they're basically saying, look at all of these sort of like ragtag people running around in these middle school gymnasiums. Is this the great empire that we, have established here in our so-called democratic processes?
And what's interesting about that is that it's this attack on this voting process in Iowa, and it appears that a large part of this, to an extent, is that anger that so many of these Midwestern white Americans were coming together for Bernie Sanders to a large extent. I mean, it's very interesting.
Which is a key, and so if you actually get to the candidate aspect of this, yes, so I would say it's the Zionist part that's really the key piece of this in many ways. And it's a certain elitist imperial aspect that's also a part of this. Because, and I would point out too, that for the first time, also in Iowa, that Muslim groups had their own caucuses, which is very interesting, and they did it in their own spaces, and they intensely came out for the Jewish candidate, Bernie Sanders. I think like over 90% or something like that. And so and even for people who are into like group dynamics, there's an aspect of this where people are allowed to organize per their community, or per their area. And so it's very much I would say, the best of the American tradition, the American experiment, and to sort of see the CNN talking points about that this was just a stain on Iowa democracy and the Democratic Party in Iowa. And we still don't know the full dynamics about what actually happened, because what it looks like is they put it on pause because there was issues with the reporting software. I also had heard that there's a backup call-in line. That sounds like the old school, right? Maybe the Voxio approach to it, or some other, just maybe a direct call-in line. And those were very difficult to reach. I don't know if there was just a flood, or was jamming going on, or what was going on, but it looks in general like there was an issue made of this. And then one last thing in terms of sort of candidates and polling, and the reason why I brought up polling is that in the run-up to the Iowa caucus, the Des Moines Register, the local newspaper, teamed up with CNN. It was CNN, I forgot. They did the poll on the eve of the Iowa caucus, and we actually saw the screenshot of it from and it said that Bernie Sanders had something like 30%. He was up 2-1 over people like Biden and Warren, and then Buttigieg underneath that. And that was pulled, and the reason it was pulled, the reason given for being pulled, was because that a Buttigieg supporter had said that Buttigieg had not been was not an option on the poll that they were given. So I don't know whether that was a mistake or whether that was a purposeful sabotage, potentially, which comes into effect, that kind of thinking, because what it looks like is that Buttigieg's campaign, pointed out before, Buttigieg is a darling of the Israel lobby, right? He is he's probably their choice, along with Amy Klobuchar at this point, in terms of the candidates left over in the Democratic Party right now. And so they pulled his campaign apparently was invested in this, actually developing this application. So you want to go over the application?
And the last thing I'll say real quick before the last thing on the polling and the way CNN just deceptively misreported. That's definitely an understatement. It's much more than misreporting the nature of the Iowa caucus. Is that maybe some people in the state of Iowa who know how well of a process this is in its most natural form will see through the propaganda and might find themselves starting to question more and more the types of propaganda. Not just from CNN, but from this fake mainstream pseudo media apparatus that has dictated so many of our thoughts and shaped our minds in so many ways for decades now. So that's a possibility to come out of this. I mean, I don't think Iowans are going to like seeing their processes being unfairly attacked like this.
And they were really attacking Iowa intensely, like they were. And I just want one other point I want to make out that fits in with what you're talking about, this disjuncture between the reality on the ground, the democratic ground, in terms of we the people doing our actual democratic process. And I would point out the caucuses actually work very, very well. What you have is you have the best of all worlds. You have people who first, you don't even use paper. You just stand for yourself, or you sit for yourself, and you sit for your candidate. You can discuss. You can have signs. You can figure it out. You can do. People are chanting and stuff like that. So it's very vibrant. It's not like sort of like the these cryogenic containers of like backdoor technology that we usually have with our polling places, where you go in and maybe like touch a voting screen, software that could be backdoored, and you're not allowed to campaign, and it's silent. This actually feels like the discussions that we need to have, the kind of discussions we need to have. So it's actually very vital democracy. And then there's a paper trail too. So each of these precinct captains has a full paper trail about how everything broke down. And so what the corporate media and CNN specifically was complaining about was that they were in prime time and they couldn't announce the results. That was their main anger. Not that there was a problem about like that there was an issue with the accounting for the voting. You would think they're like, take your time, Iowa Democratic Party, take your time, just make sure it's right. And they were like, oh no, this is more important about who's going to draft off of this. And most importantly, it's important that we pay our sponsors back by being able to announce the results.
Yeah.
So it's really an information warfare scenario that they want to take advantage of these things on the ground, I think.
Indeed, and so I guess now we will get into this article. I'm reading from an article from thegrayzone.com written by we give credit where credit is due to people, written by Max Blumenthal. It's a well-written up article on what appears to be the reality of the situation with the mechanism behind the manufactured idea of chaos in this primary and in this caucus, and the fact that they can't count the votes and they're all just losing their minds over it. Is the title of this article, by the way, I believe this article just came out within the past 2 hours, written by Max Blumenthal, following up on a series of tweets with some findings by the journalist Lee Fang, who I believe is with The Intercept currently. This article by Max Blumenthal is titled, Pro-Israel Buttigieg backer Seth Klarman is top funder of the group behind Iowa's disastrous voting app. Behind the app that delayed Iowa's voting results is a dark money operation funded by anti-Sanders billionaires. Its top donor, Seth Klarman, is a Buttigieg backer who has dumped money into pro-settler Israel lobby groups. So, I'm just going to read the first paragraph here. At the time of publication, 12 hours after voting in the Democratic Party's Iowa caucus has ended, the results have not been announced. The delay in reporting is the result of a failed app developed by a company appropriately named Shadow Inc.
But is it really failed? I mean, even Max is like, he's obviously like skewing this too, the way he skews the Russian thing component. But
yeah, failed app. I mean, was it? That's a good question. And in the second paragraph here, I'll read this real quick. This firm was staffed by Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama campaign veterans and created by a Democratic dark money nonprofit backed by hedge fund billionaires, including Seth Klarman, a prolific funder of pro-settler Israel lobby organizations. Klarman has also contributed directly to Pete Buttigieg's campaign. And this article goes on to detail some of the very extreme hardline pro-Israel causes that Seth Klarman has been involved in. Things such as funding for Birthright Israel, funding for Washington Institute for Near East Policy, the funding for the
Foundation for Defense
of Democracies, which is very interesting that you have this man who's funding centrist moderate Democrats that is behind a neoconservative think tank, even though Klarman was a Republican donor, and I guess there's been issues for him not supporting Trump for various reasons, perhaps related to his own financial interest in Puerto Rico and Trump's actions with regards to Puerto Rico in the aftermath of the 2017.
Potentially about canceling when he just announced he might cancel the debt.
Yes, and there's something about $900-something million, according to this article, that Seth Klarman has at stake in Puerto Rico.
So he's what they call a vulture capitalist, probably, is what it looks like.
So,
But wait, I just want to point out what the FDD connection is, what the WINEP connection is. This is not only, quote-unquote, the Israel lobby. This is Israeli intelligence, as we were hypothesizing before this even happened, okay? This is the Israeli intelligence. But what this is if you go look at the Israel lobby documentary put out by Al Jazeera that was suppressed for more than a year. Remember who was actually looked like he was part of that was someone like Alan Dershowitz. And but the FDD, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, was pointed out that it was actually, they had a representative of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, basically. That the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, this is also, remember, Avigdor Lieberman was the head of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs for a while. It's basically their foreign propaganda operations arm. And in the documentary, the lobby put out by Al Jazeera, it points out that there is basically a representative of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs in Israel inside the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And then he also is the owner of the Jerusalem Post?
No, Times of Israel.
Times of Israel, yeah. And so I think if you look at the newspapers in Israel, for example, the Jerusalem Post and the Times of Israel are the well-known sort of hardcore Israeli intelligence outlets.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so with this, you get an interesting picture.
I mean, Haaretz is also an Israeli intelligence outlet, but it's sort of like the progressive, quote unquote, progressive Israeli intelligence outlet.
Yeah. And so you get an interesting picture here painted, and something that we were talking about in relation to this is an outlet called. And I guess it's an initiative called Defending Digital Democracy. And this paints a very interesting picture of a bipartisan effort as far as solutions to the problems with possible voting processes through things like quote-unquote foreign interference and things like this. And of course, Max Blumenthal in his typical manner does just manage to just take shots at the idea that that there's any type of nefarious like Russian domestic operations going on, because he has to do that in what he's reporting here. But he does bring up the Defending Digital Democracy based out of the Belfer Center at Harvard University, and the two co-founders of this initiative are two particularly interesting political operatives, Robby Mook, who was the head of the 2016 Hillary Clinton campaign, and also a guy who appears to have a very, very interesting background, to say the least, Matt Rhoades, who headed the Mitt Romney 2012 campaign, and he's got a history of being involved with the 2004 Bush re-election campaign and all the machinations involved with that, opposition research in the 2004 campaign for Bush. Then was also involved in perhaps on behalf of the Bush administration looking into information, and possibly also covering up possible information about John Roberts, the Supreme Court Chief Justice, as far as his background. I mean, I don't know the nature of it, but it sounds that's what the case might have been with Matt Rhoades.
If we explain that part a little bit more about what that might mean in terms of compromise operations.
In terms of a compromise operation, you have the Supreme Court Chief Justice like John Roberts, who right now is playing a very interesting role in the Trump impeachment process, whereas on one hand you've got people all the way from Lee Stranahan all the way to the generic kind of Fox News Breitbart right wing attacking a pro-Trump apparatus, attacking John Roberts for not allowing Rand Paul to ask his question where he might have implicated a possible name of the possible whistleblower who's at the center of all this Ukraine intrigue, saying he should be, in Lee Stranahan's case, saying he should be removed. He should remove himself from the Supreme Court over this. And then there's also a narrative about John Roberts not wanting to make a defining vote as in his role as Chief Justice. He could break a tiebreaker on the whole Trump impeachment thing, whether or not to have witnesses officially being brought up for. So in this case, there's questions about possible, with someone like John Roberts, there's always questions with these Supreme Court justices and people getting to that type of something like the Supreme Court is influential as that in terms of possible compromise. Of course, we've talked about Anthony Kennedy and Brett Kavanaugh and some interesting scenarios surrounding them. But in the case of the Chief Justice John Roberts, there is a type of research that Matt Rhoades could be doing on behalf of the Bush administration, on behalf of the interests that put John Roberts in as Chief Justice. What kind of information is there that could or could not be covered up? What could it tell us about the nature of the types of roles someone like John Roberts plays in?
Like similarly, the way that polling not only plays the role of finding out information. That's what the point that I wanted to make about the Arthur Finkelstein network and how a lot of them are pollsters, is that the point is that they're not only soliciting information, but more often they're actually projecting propaganda, and that polling is involved with information warfare, and that's why it's crucial to modern elections. But the same thing is true about opposition research, and that has a dual function. So it's not only about like when Rhoades is vetting, quote unquote, vetting John Roberts for his position. Yes, he's trying to find out what kind of difficult potential information is out there for Roberts to be questioned about as he heads into a Senate confirmation hearing or something like that. But at the same time, and I would point out this is a parallel with something like the Steele dossier, and Paul Singer, I think, was involved, right, in the original funding of the Steele dossier, and everyone often just forgets about that. It wasn't the Hillary Clinton's campaign basically sat on that information and did almost nothing with it publicly. No, it was the Republican Paul Singer who originally invested in that investigation. And so the opposition research is also about potentially having the dirt, having the potential blackmail or leverage on the information on, quote unquote, your guy, or what might turn out to become your guy, which I think people should more and more consider that aspect of the Singer involvement in the Steele dossier. It wasn't only just to sort of potentially take Donald Trump down or to prepare his backers for what he might face, but it was also to get the goods on him, to potentially have leverage on him for what their interests are down the road, and this is that network.
Yeah, so I think through this, there's an interesting picture that gets painted.
This is that Paul Singer network.
Yes, which very obviously was what we were talking about earlier, is Israeli intelligence at the most advanced and very highest levels.
Maybe even above Mossad.
Yes.
I.e. Jerome Corsi.
Right.
I.e. AL.
Yes.
Or the Mega Group.
Yeah. And there's a lot of tie-ins there with Birthright Israel to the Mega Group, and some of these other some of these other institutions as well. I mean,
that's Michael Steinhardt is the Mega Group and the main backer of Birthright Israel over many years.
And I'm sure if you look,
whose father was in the Lansky mob.
And if you look at the ties and funders of things like Foundation for Defense of Democracies, I'm sure some of the same connections come up without question. So, I mean, it's just a matter of those connections and finding them, I think. Because inevitably, I think you will run into them. But I think what we're seeing here with this defending digital democracy, and then Seth Klarman being behind this Shadow Inc. And you're seeing it's like a bipartisanship in terms of coming together in a way on shaping the narrative of this chaotic process that we can't control. And then the defending digital democracy folks step in, and the name's escaping me at the moment. Rosenbach is the actual head of this, along with Mook and Rhoades. And Rosenbach was when the Pentagon under Ashton Carter, the Secretary of Defense, who wrote this pre-September 11th Foreign Affairs, I believe, published article with John Deutsch and also Dov Zakheim.
Philip
Zelikow.
Philip Zelikow wrote the outline for the 9/11 Commission before it started. You can't think of a more containing structure than that. And I believe that paper, and we actually dealt with that paper a little bit in relationship to someone like Dennis Ross, I think, and Winep. I think it's actually that might have been a Winep paper. Actually, go back and check that. I think it's called "Imagining the Catastrophic Event" or the Catastrophic Incident, or something.
So like a third precursor, along with the PNAC document, as well as Grand Chessboard and Brzezinski, and then all laying allusions to these types of events, to this type of major event that could bring about a major shifting of the global map, the global landscape post this major event. So you've got Rosen, and the first name's escaping me. Rosenbach is basically overseeing this Belfer Center defending digital democracy.
And who's on the advisory board there?
Well, with the Belfer Center, among other people, is Michael Chertoff.
Michael Chertoff, not only, of course, Homeland Security, that's DHS, who was involved in the drilling for mass chaos and violence for the American election, as CNN tries to pretend like the highly structured, very well run Iowa caucuses are. No, the DHS was drilling with cyber reason Israeli intelligence. Whitney Webb wrote the article on this. I actually questioned Tom Steyer about this also, in addition to the question of the app, that at that point there was no information about who did it. Michael Chertoff, of course, Homeland Security, drilling with cyber reason on Israeli military intelligence on mass chaos for the next coming election. But Michael Chertoff also involved in Carbine 911 alongside people like Jeffrey Epstein, Victor Vekselberg, Ehud Barak, all kinds of elements of Israeli intelligence. And Carbine 911 is a data-driven approach, probably some kind of similar aspects where there's backdoors and data capture in relationship to the 911 network in trying to basically apparently try to take it over in the United States of America. And then another person on the board is Nathaniel Rothschild.
Yes,
right?
He has a relationship with, an indirect relationship at the very least, it appears, with Oleg Deripaska.
Or a direct relationship,
Yeah.
and I think very close with Roman Abramovich and Oleg Deripaska.
I know I saw Deripaska specifically mention what I was looking at, and I don't have all the details right now in front of me on that, but I will. So we've got a bipartisan picture being painted here of an effort to, when you bring in Defending Digital Democracy and you bring in this Matt Rhoades and his work as a Republican operative over the years, combined with Robby Mook, who headed the last 2016 Democrat campaign and probably knows most of the facts about the nature of what actually happened with the DNC server and all this stuff, and the nature of a lot of the keys behind trying to get behind the collusion aspects of the 2016 campaign and who was with what. But
that's a good
you're
point.
seeing this.
I do want one thing I want to point about Rhoades is that Rhoades also knows where the bodies are buried, similar to maybe like the way that Mook does to the DNC. Rhoades knows the RNC because there's this whole thing about smart tech. Remember the Mike Connell, the Rove's IT guru brought down in the plane crash, working with Paul Manafort in Ukraine, apparently involved in the subterfuge in the 2004, which Rhoades was involved in all of that circle. But the Republican email server was compromised, and people like Lindsey Graham seem to change their tune on Trump in relationship to some of this. So.
And you also had, as a result of that, the retirements of two prominent Republican senators who were seen as, not
potentially anti-Trump.
Yes, Bob Corker of Tennessee and also Jeff Flake of Arizona. So, and then Lindsey Graham just completely flips the script. I mean,
after a golf game, which maybe Trump delivered the goods about. We got the goods.
So there is a 4D chess game going on.
Yeah, except it's on behalf of corrupt powers. And
Right.
Rhoades also knows where the bodies are buried in terms of the 2012, right? He was Mitt Romney's 2012 guy, and that it was in 2012. Go look at the paper by Choquette and Johnson showing massive discrepancies in the Republican primary that based on very specific machines, ES and S. Go look at ES and S in relationship, Kobach, that whole scenario, and it was against Ron Paul and for Mitt Romney in the Republican primaries. Okay, so Rhoades know where's those election fraud bodies are buried too.
That's a great point. And so through this failed, quote unquote, failed app, Shadow Inc., that is being blamed for the delay in reporting on the results here and the fake news narrative of the chaotic nature of the Iowa caucuses. You have this, and then you have Defending Digital Democracy, which comes in with the election integrity to maintain the integrity of our elections, to stop the foreign interference and to give solutions to these types of issues. So you're almost seeing a bipartisan, sounds to me like problem, reaction, solution coming into place, where you have this Israeli front company that is being blamed for the problems with the reporting or lack thereof in the Iowa caucus. The caucus can be blamed for the chaos of it, which we've already talked about is just not there. This is being blamed for the reason for there being so much confusion. And then you have the bipartisan Defending Digital Democracy Alliance with these bipartisan political operatives representing clearly the establishments, the epitome of the establishments of both the Republican and Democrat parties, come in with their solutions to the problem. And what kind of solutions? I mean, heaven only knows the solutions. I mean, we're seeing some of the possible solutions which are being laid out in articles by people like Whitney Webb, with the scenarios and some of the scary possibilities of things that could play out before an election and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So this is a bipartisan thing, and it benefits the darling of this lobby being Pete Buttigieg, it looks like, who maybe in a mistake that might come back to haunt him, prematurely comes out and brags on Twitter, it looks like we won. We'll see you in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that a mistake, because I think that's probably like one of the intended benefits of this.
I mean, not a mistake, but something that
you're
could
right
come back to bite him.
Yes. I think you're completely correct.
I think he was probably there.
And as some people are calling him Mayor Cheat, Mayor Cheat Buttigieg, the darling of the Israel lobby. And remember also that the precursor to all of this was the Melman Group and their Democratic Israel whatever pack coming out and attacking Bernie Sanders in the lead up to the caucus. So I think you're right that Buttigieg was meant to be one of the immediate benefactors, and there's these much bigger, longer term benefactors meant to be taken by this kind of thing. But at some level, it looks like this might have been disrupted or exposed or undone potentially.
Yeah.
And Mayor Cheat tried to grab a win that he probably didn't even get.
And regardless of whatever motivations may or may not be in place with people who are doing this reporting, like for example Lee Fang or The Intercept, whatever The Intercept does or does not represent, whatever Max Blumenthal does or does not represent him, we've kind of talked about some of what we see as the flaws in his reporting, even on a well done article like this, is that this is a game changer in the era of social media, in the era of the new media. There's a lot of things that you were talking about how this would have been kept under wraps for years in a previous era, but now this is out within 12 hours of the closing of the beginning of the caucus process. So that is a fascinating difference, and I think this is a sign of it's like these types of operations that just 4 years ago were very successful in a lot of ways are going to be very, very difficult to keep under wraps, because you said might see an increase in investigative journalism as a result of this, people looking to connect dots, and the Sanders supporters, the grassroots Sanders supporters, who are very social media savvy, there's an element of them that understands that there were some things that were very wrong with the 2016 process. They're not going to forget about these things, and this is amazing that just how quickly this information came out. And I mean, we're still trying to process it, as you can see. Like, we're kind of all over the place in our coverage of this, but I mean, it's so quick. It's amazing just how quick.
I was trying to upload videos that was asking the question when I didn't know. We didn't know what the heck was going on with this app. We knew that it was fishy. We knew that they weren't talking about it. I asked Tom Steyer about it. He sidestepped it.
Oh yeah. Right.
I asked Jake Tapper, and I was trying to upload these videos as this was still unknown on CNN, and CNN was actually like doing denials on air about, but we're hearing that it's the app, but it's not an intrusion. Of course, it's not an intrusion when the penetrator is already in the house.
And also, this gets ahead of a narrative that if a foreign entity wanted to interfere for someone like Sanders, or create as like a mechanism of really trying to interrupt our elections process, this gets in front of that narrative, because you don't want to put the narrative out there that it's pro-Israel, Israeli intelligence, Israel lobby that are out there interfering, looks like, for Buttigieg. So you don't want to get that narrative out there. I mean,
that's a good point, because what part of this is that you have these red team, blue team is sort of the way in an intelligence way it would work, is that you have the defense of digital democracies, defending digital democracies, being the stress testers coming in the months before this, talking about cybersecurity in relationship to the Iowa caucus, whereas you have Cyber Reason, Israeli intelligence, coming in the run up to the 2020 elections to quote unquote stress test. But then on the back end here, we've already have it basically. This is the Israel lobby at the very least, and I would say this is an American proxy of Israeli intelligence operating very likely, actually doing the disruption.
Okay, we're getting down to about a little less than 15 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to say on this topic?
No, let's run through Trump.
Okay,
yeah.
So Thursday night, and we've already alluded to this in a live stream we did during the Bernie Sanders big game party that he actually barely even showed up for. Did a photo op and left, basically. But we, on Thursday night, attended a Trump rally in Des Moines. And this, to say the least, to say it was interesting would be an understatement. This was a fascinating process to see play out. And didn't really get active for us until about the last 45 minutes or so. But everything from the opening cult-like prayer at the very beginning of this rally that opened the rally to the end of the event. And I mean, by now, I'm sure...
But describe why the prayer was cult.
Oh my! It was basically thanking God for Trump and telling God to put His hand of protection. It was done in this, what you see with this strain of like dominionist, prosperity gospel televangelist, the kind, by the way, Paula White, who we missed in West Des Moines yesterday because I wasn't doing my job in following.
Oh, Paula White was in West Des Moines yesterday.
She was with all the Trump
and condemned the satanic wombs.
Yes, it's this dominionist prosperity gospel televangelist types of people that are with Trump's evangelical advisory board.
Thank God for Trump the aborter.
That Trump was God's candidate, that God made Trump president to save the country. So this prayer was very much along those lines. And what was scary was this was a crowd of thousands of people. I don't imagine the vast majority of these people. There's some who I'm sure are, but I don't think the vast majority, I doubt that the majority, I won't say vast majority, I doubt the majority of these people are what you would call like evangelical Bible thumpers. But I didn't see anybody who had any issue with this prayer. This was the reactions, and I'd like to upload this eventually. The reactions to this prayer were pretty, it was the lack of like any type of alarms being raised, even by people who obviously are not like in this evangelical, what you might call Bible thumping milieu. I thought that was very, it was something else. And then all the way to the end of the rally, where I'm sure a good percentage of our audience has seen the video we uploaded of you talking with Major Garrett of CBS News, and then being escorted out by security and being walked through the throng of screaming, angry Trump supporters. They were angry that they were being held up and leaving because of a damn snowflake who wanted to protest the president, even though they had no idea why we were there, what we were talking about.
And we've since found the identity of one of the women you can see in the video who's actually trying to take pictures of what's happening. She's an Italian journalist who's been following a lot of the issues with the Bernie Sanders campaign for many, many years. She came up to us outside of the watch party, so that's interesting. But we still don't know the identity of the dark-haired woman who actually triggered the security action, even when Major Garrett himself said that's not necessary.
Yeah. Right there in the media row, and it's very obvious that people in the media row, once again, it's like there's a lot of handling going on in these media rows. It seems that people around the journalists get more, or politicians in some cases, get more unsettled than even the journalists.
Well, these are handlers, and we need to know who the identity of these handlers.
Yes, that's a good point. But and even someone as probably as shady as reporting as possibly compromised Major Garrett has had less of an issue with it than the handlers around him.
Because even a compromised quote unquote U.S. reporter knows that you do not try to just escort someone trying to do press functions immediately out of an event. You have enough respect for just the traditions of the American press process that you know that looks bad at the very least.
Yeah. We had a lot of thoughts out of this. People can watch the Major Garrett video as well as the Jack Posobiec video. I'm sure, and obviously there's been a lot of people who've seen that. And get your thoughts on it. You can formulate your thoughts on how you thought this process played out, what happened. But Jeremy, we've talked about this among ourselves the other night. What were a couple of the major, your feelings coming out outside of the Major Garrett stuff, outside of all that? What were some of the big takeaways you took from this rally? What you saw playing out as far as the crowd and the various people speaking? We talked about Brad Parscale already, but what some of the things you took out observing the crowd, observing the various things that were going on during the various speeches, obviously leading up to the main event, which was Donald Trump?
Well, two main things, I think, and one is maybe the micro observation of what it's actually like to be in that environment psychologically.
Yeah, it was something that we thought we couldn't turn it down the opportunity to go.
We had to at least experience a Trump rally in the Trump era to get a sense of what it is, and so that we can report on it, so we can analyze it. And so, from a visceral sense, we were sort of surrounded by some young men, actually, maybe college guys, and they were sort of treating it like a rock concert. And so that's one observation, is a reminder that the reason that these rallies are powerful is because they help express what it was called by the sociologist Emil Durkheim, collective effervescence, which can come into, that's also why religion is very powerful, organized religion, when you come and pray together. But it's also why things like maybe even concerts or even political gatherings can become very powerful emotionally and psychologically.
Sporting events would be one of those.
Sporting events. That's a great example, actually, because that's probably the biggest one in modern day America. And so these young guys, like, they weren't actually disturbed when I would start yelling out specific things. It would be like, that sounds like Jeffrey Epstein when Trump was talking about catch and release at the border and stuff like that. And and at one, actually in the very beginning, the first time I said something about Jeffrey Epstein, one of these guys actually looked at me. He's like, "Yeah," and he almost like gave me a thumbs up or something like that. But then when I began to be clear that it was sort of like maybe like not disrupting the rally, but maybe disrupting the narrative about they were here to celebrate the sort of God Emperor preaching at the pulpit. As it was like a concert, and so they weren't really angry so much about the message. They were angry at me because I was like disrupting the spell almost of their rock concert. So that was one thing I noticed. And then the other macro thing is that I think in a big sense, the reason why a lot of the social psychology, the collective social psychology we might talk about the American situation, I think can be boiled down to two qualities that we should look at. And one is the idea of American exceptionalism that was playing out a lot in the speech.
I will say that this event was, in a lot of cases, was the perception of American exceptionalism as it's laid out, both the positive connotations of like the Judeo-Christian supremacists, but also in its ugliest form, as you would see a lot of left commentators lay it out. That was definitely in action as far as like we're the exceptional country. The whole America is great because America is good mentality, and America can do no wrong as long as it's your guys who are running the country. But anyway, when it's Obama, that's a different story. But no, American exceptionalism it was very much. That was American exceptionalism at its peak, this rally was. And then, okay, so go ahead.
And I just want to point out that the issue with exceptionalism, think about make America great, right? That sounds like potentially like a good aspiration. But the idea of it fits in with the idea of exceptionalism. I've always said, no, let's first make America good. Let's first make America good. And then we can live up to our greatness.
Yes.
But greatness is attractive in a certain way because it skips over the problem of exceptionalism. Because exceptionalism, remember, accept. It means you're unique, you're separated out, you're better than, right? It's not about actual greatness, which is almost always measured against your own capacity. And sure, there's good senses of competition, and I think that that there's large aspects of competition across economics, sports, culture, all kinds of technological production that should be encouraged, and it's good to use that aspect of competition. But exceptionalism is thinking that you're better than everybody else, or you're the exception to the rule. And so then that fits into the second aspect, and I'd say that that's a way of sidestepping actually figuring out how to be great, and definitely trying how to be good. Yes. Because it actually in many ways accepts you from being good. And then the second aspect, in terms of the sort of maybe the grand self-psychology that we the American people should do, has to do with American innocence. And this is where we have become so prone to be, I would say, also be prodded, taken advantage of by forces not only within our own country, but also forces such as Israel, the global Zionist lobby and power construction. It plays to our idea of we're innocent, and we're sort of like the ones who are always being attacked, and we're always just responding because we're innocent.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And when you think about American innocence, I think this is important because, I mean, I just saw this as bad as this rally was. There's a lot of very, very I had a lot of very bad reactionary reactions in this event, particularly to a lot of the buzzwords, as well as you saw the very bloodthirsty nature of the way people reacted to Trump bragging about the Soleimani assassination. But this is important. I think.
That was even a place where I was like scared to say
Yeah. Oh,
something,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I can't. Yeah, I totally feel you on that. It's
Oh, I thought there's someone's getting pulled over behind us. I thought it was for us, but it's not.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, but this is an important concept because one of the things that, and I was trying to explain this here in the last 3 minutes or so, one of the things I'm realizing more and more and understanding is just the problem with the collective, I mean, it is identity politics, but it also goes beyond that, the collective labeling of various people, various groups, in doing so in a collective manner. And one of the things I think that is done, that this idea of what we talk about American exceptionalism, but also American innocence, is that it's very, as hard as it can be, and I understand it's very difficult it's very difficult at times with some of these really, really passionate supporters of someone like Donald Trump, who have, I believe, are so wrong on so many things, from everything from the idea of seeing the other person as your enemy to their very cult-like support of all things that this particular president is doing. We have to take a step back and realize that these are, by and large, are not bad people. These are people who genuinely believe and they genuinely believe in the idea, and that America, because they don't have the knowledge of the things that this country's been doing in the world, and the criminality against its own citizens, is things like September 11th and other events. They really do believe in this idea, what you talk about, of American innocence. And so, sometimes we have to take a step back and maybe, as hard as it could be, just not be so quick to collectively just label people who go in a certain direction as just bigoted and racist, because they don't believe that about themselves, and that creates a very reactionary process. So it's got to be these things, and this also goes the same way with us supporters of someone like Bernie Sanders. We've got to have conversations about this, and because people do have their beliefs in terms of the Trump camp, of this idea of American exceptionalism combined with American innocence. We are the indispensable nation that does not do wrong in the world. We do right for people, and so we have to have conversations that go beyond just a specific labeling, or what a lot of people would call a smearing, for that reason. And instead, maybe as hard as it can be, there's got to be efforts to try and educate at some level.
Yes, I mean, I do think there is a component that involves resentment politics, which is not necessarily in it like actually believing in good motives, but but it's more based on wanting to sort of get those other people, and those are the aspects of the sort of proto-fascist elements of the Trump movement, that where he played a lot on the imagery of we're being taken advantage of, and it's the sort of the real serious threats are going to be solved by building that wall, and that's where the biggest threats come from. And there's a resentment that goes down to the outsider and to those maybe even below you in terms of the economic social striation. So that's an aspect of it. But I think in general, yes, let's create good faith conversations with people from all backgrounds and see where we can take that.
And that's something I was sharing with you. It's harder and harder for me to do that with people that are very much in this Trump milieu. But it's got to, it has to be done at some level somewhere. So it's it's a matter of all kind of. We all have work to do with regards to that. I know I do, because I was expressing to you how hard it can be at times. So, anyway, we are about to end here. So anyway, until next time, thanks for listening.
Yeah, Kansas City, 50 50 heading out of Iowa here, unless we're actually already out of Iowa.
We're out of Iowa. We're getting close. Anyway,
all right.
Till next time.
Antidote, we out.